Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have a review of the OPPO Find X7 Ultra. Let's get started. I should point out that this device does not have an official distribution in Mexico or in many other countries, so this will be an approach to the high-end technology that OPPO offers us, but unfortunately it cannot be purchased officially in many regions. However, you could also get it by import if you are interested, because we are definitely in front of a device of very high performance. In other ways, I think it might disappoint. So, let's tell absolutely everything about it below. The design will no doubt be that of a high-end device. We find curved glass here on the front. Also, quite reduced bezels, so the look is totally premium. And in resistance, it doesn't make any kind of sacrifice either, integrating Gorilla Glass Victus 2. On the right side, we have the power button along with the volume buttons in an aluminum frame. At the top is placed a microphone plus infrared to function as a universal remote control and a secondary audio output. On the left side is placed the alert slider, which will allow us to place the device in a sound mode, vibration, or complete silence. So it has 3 different positions, and honestly I find it one of the most pleasant sections also to use on the phone. Although you have to get used to it, because in my case I really like to play with this slider to relax, and sometimes I put my cell phone on silent without realizing it. Taking advantage of this profile view, let me tell you that it has a thickness of 9.5 millimeters, so it is not characterized by being too thin, but obviously being a high-end device, it must find enough space to put a good battery and a tremendous photographic system. In fact, that's also why you realize that the camera module comes to protrude quite aggressively, although that also makes it have a very special touch, as if it were a dedicated camera. At the bottom is placed the tray where we can place SIM cards. In this case it is a dual SIM model, but you know that this varies greatly depending on the distribution. Here are also placed 2 microphones along with the USB-C port and the main speaker. And the back personally seems to me one of the most original in the smartphone market. It looks very nice with this dual tone, but not only is it a dual tone, but it is also a dual finish, as on the bottom we will find synthetic leather with a soft touch, very nice as well. And on the top, a satin design, highlighting again the finish that we find for the camera module, which has some reliefs highlighted throughout this contour, with some more polished areas which make the device sincerely look very nice aesthetically. Although there are also options made of glass, but overall the device has a weight of 221 grams, which is not too high considering the tremendous photographic system it has. And finally, in addition to this edition called Sepia Brown, it is available in ocean blue and black color. And like any high-end device, it has IP-level water resistance. The screen is excellent. It has a size of 6.82 inches, so it's really very large. And it gives us a 2K resolution. To be exact, it's 3168 by 1440 pixels. So with that, it achieves a very high level of detail, which is 510 pixels per inch. All the images, all the text, and all the content displayed on this screen will look extremely sharp, and as you can see, it supports HDR content. What does this mean? That some areas of the screen will be able to emit more light than others to give a feeling of much more realism, obviously displaying compatible content. In this case, the screen reaches a maximum peak brightness of 4500 nits when you are viewing this type of content. And obviously we are in front of an AMOLED panel, so it offers us very intense colors, very high contrasts, and also good viewing angles. But it's not only a screen that has a very high brightness, but also a considerably low brightness for comfortable use at night. Although the accessibility options do not include an extra dimming option, which we could find in other devices. The display has LTPO technology, so in static content it can go down to 1 Hz to not consume too much power, and in dynamic movements it can go up to 120 Hz. In fact, it has a selector for this automatic adjustment, or you can manually choose whether you want 60 Hz or 120. This display also includes different color calibration modes for you to choose the one you like best. Obviously, the Pro mode will give you much more accurate colors. You can also customize the color temperature of the screen, and it has different visual comfort modes where you could enable a bedtime mode that will dim the color as the night comes, or you can also manually enable these types of filters for a much more comfortable viewing. In fact, note that you can also select whether you want the screen to be in color or black and white. So these are good tools, and it also has an anti-flicker option that will make the screen go up to 2160 Hz to avoid eye strain. Something I also like is that it has the natural tone mode, which will try to mimic the white color of the environment, so if you're in a warm environment, the screen will also mimic that warm coloration. And as with many TVs, it also comes with picture enhancers that are turned off by default as they could consume more battery, but you could turn them on if necessary. This device has 3 audio outputs, although obviously 2 speakers, so it does have stereo sound. The main audio output is placed at the bottom and is the one that offers the most presence of bass frequencies and the highest quality. But at the top it has a secondary output that combines with the headphone for calls to offer the stereo sound that I mentioned, although these audio outputs have less bass presence and less power. So, we are not in front of a completely symmetrical sound, but it will offer us a good quality suitable for the high end. Let's listen to a small test, but remember that it is not the same to listen to it live. The sound is of good quality and good volume, although it is not the best I've seen in the industry. In addition, it should be noted the incorporation of Dolby Atmos that offers us different surround sound presets, and in case of connecting headphones within the music preset, a 10-band equalizer will also be available, but as I say, only when using headphones, and I don't like that. It also has spatial sound features, again especially for when you're going to use headphones, and it has a feature called Hollow Audio, although again it's very much focused on giving you a spatial sound experience coming from different directions. And as you could already see, it doesn't include a headphone jack, so you should use headphones through the USB-C port or use Bluetooth headphones. And in this regard, the device has a wide codec support. For example, aptX and aptX Adaptive to give you much higher resolution audio, but it also supports the LDAC codec that is present in high-end headphones that also give you ultra-high resolution sound wirelessly. They will even offer the LHDC codec as well, so you have a very good catalog of codecs available for using high-resolution wireless headphones. The device offers 2 microphones on the bottom, another microphone on the top, and another microphone a bit hidden in the relief of the camera module. So that's 4 microphones in total, and probably several of them are used in this mode called Clear Voice that will help you reduce noise in calls and video calls within various applications. So it can become quite useful, but let's listen to a test.
Este audio ha sido grabado utilizando los micrófonos integrados del OPPO Find X7 Ultra.
As you could hear, the device picks up voices very well, and below we will see a video recorded with this device setting the sound system in my living room at maximum volume. Again, it is confirmed that the device has very good quality microphones, so you can easily capture the sound of concerts when recording your videos. The front camera is 21mm. It offers us a 32 megapixel sensor, which is pretty good, but the aperture is f2.4, so it does not offer us so much light entry even though it has autofocus. In this case, to quickly enter the camera, you can activate an option to press volume down or volume up with the screen off, but I insist it is a setting that comes off by default, so you have no quick shortcut to access the camera when the device has the screen on. The device gives us a snappy capture with the front camera, and note that it has 3 different zoom settings, which is quite curious. It also has a button where you can have some color filters, including 3 master filters that were developed in collaboration with Hasselblad. It also incorporates a beauty mode with several parameters where you can completely modify your face. It is one of the beauty modes that has the most options in the industry. In the settings, you can access different capture methods, so you can touch any area of the screen to capture the photo, or you can also activate the gesture showing the palm, which has a correct operation by activating a 3-second timer. The front camera is fine, although from my point of view the rear cameras are completely on another level. So in this case, it seems to me that it lacks a little more contrast and a little more intensity to the colors in some scenarios, but it is a good quality photograph. One interesting thing is that it has autofocus, which is what we might expect from a high-end device. So if you're too far away from the camera, you're still gonna come out in focus. In fact, this device allows you to zoom 2x digital, which in conjunction with the autofocus would allow you to have more detailed scenes of your face, although in this case it must be said that the autofocus has a bit of a short range, so you cannot be so close to the camera, but for group shots it includes an interesting feature. To begin with, observe the behavior. Notice that people who are a little closer will come out more in focus, people who are farther away will come out more out of focus, but through the gallery the device includes a feature to focus on all the faces and notice that there is a noticeable difference. In this case, all the faces will come out well detailed, but the result is very curious because the rest of the body comes out of focus. However, the face comes out in focus. So I get the feeling that it's a bit of a strange photograph if you look at the details, but it's actually a good choice for group shots. In backlit scenarios, the preview still doesn't look optimized, and after taking the picture it balances the lit areas very well, although the shadow area might still look a bit overexposed, especially in this type of very aggressive backlighting. In backlit scenarios that may not be as aggressive, the result will be a little better, but again note my shirt is black, but in this case it looks like it's gray. Likewise, my hair looks too light, so it seems to be a matter of optimizing a good balance. This was a cloudy day where only a little bit of blue sky is revealed, and actually the result is very good at balancing the lights. The problem is just a bit in the shadows. However, this camera's f2 f-stop 4 aperture can suffer a bit more when you are in indoor scenarios where there is not so much lighting. Although it manages to maintain good color saturation, you immediately notice that the level of detail is reduced. At night it is similar. While it is a well-lit photograph, you notice that the details are mostly lost, especially outside of the face. The face I think comes out well thanks to good software optimization, but for example the texture of the clothing has mostly been lost due to the noise reduction it must have, but the photograph looks very clean in many settings, even in the darker parts, so it's a clean, well-lit photograph but with a little less detail than we would have liked considering it's a high-end device. And extreme backlit selfies, we're going to notice that they have a good result, but again all the textures are lost. It looks like a completely smooth surface due to the noise removal it has to perform, although it seems to me that the face does come out with enough detail. Although when using the screen as a flash simulation, the color balance may not be ideal as it casts a very cool light, and if you are in a warm environment, the result will look a bit weird. Night portrait photography is also going to be of good quality. I think overall it's a very well-behaved device, although very similar to what we were seeing with normal night photography. There will appear less textures than desired, and in this case a little more graininess in the darker areas. But the photography really delivers with very good quality unless you get into exploring the minute details. But even in these minute details, it can still compete very well against any other high-end device. Although it notes that in the daytime it does not give us good quality portraits, as it is not able to keep objects in focus. I think this would be a point where OPPO still has a lot of room for improvement, as portraits with the front camera do not look good quality. Plus again, it's a picture with less contrast than we would like. Above all, you're going to notice because using the rear camera system, the result goes way up a notch. Let's get to know the most advanced photographic system we currently see in the industry. We start with the 14mm camera, that is the ultra-wide camera, which is on the bottom. It has a 50 megapixel sensor, offers us f2 0-point aperture and autofocus, so it also works as a macro camera. Then we jump to the 23mm camera, considered by many as a main camera, although OPPO stresses that all its cameras are main camera. So, this camera also has a 50 megapixel sensor, in this case with f1.8 aperture. It also has autofocus, and in this case we do see optical stabilization as well. Also, the integrated sensor here is 1 inch, so it picks up a ton of light. In fact, this same lens can give you different focal lengths, intermediate, or it can also give you plus or minus 2x zoom with optical quality at 47mm. So even though it's one camera, it could give you different focal lengths as if it were several cameras. Then we come to the center with the 72mm camera that is 3x optical zoom, also with 50 megapixels on the sensor. The aperture is f2.6, so it's not that spectacular. We noticed a little reduction in light input, but it has autofocus and also has optical stabilization. Although it's curious that even though it's a 72mm camera in its specs, the pictures actually appear to be 65mm, so there could be a bit of confusion there. And finally, the camera at the top is the 135mm camera, that's 6x optical zoom, also with 50 megapixels on the sensor. Although in this case the aperture drops down to f4.3, so it closes down quite a bit. So it doesn't offer us such a spectacular light input, but it retains autofocus and optical stabilization. And as I said, if you press the X button again, you'll notice that this camera is able to give you different focal lengths so you can take pictures with different framing. That's something that can become very useful. And it works not only with the 1x camera, but also with the 3x camera, which by default gives 72mm, but it can go up to 85mm as well. And with the 6x camera case, it can also give you the 135 or 300mm setting. In fact, these focal lengths you can customize in the settings to turn some on or off and say what focal length you want it to take as a default on the 1x button. Like any device, it has some lag in the camera preview, and as always in my testing, I tried to capture number 3, but in auto mode, note how difficult it was. It usually has a small delay. Although it's important to note that this device has an action mode that's going to allow you to capture with much more precision and speed. So using the action mode, I was able to capture the exact moment. The device also integrates a burst mode, although it takes more than half a second to start, so you have to use it well in advance. But the interesting thing about this burst is that it can capture 200 pictures, so I think it can be quite easy to extract the exact moment. And obviously it's a capture that lasts for quite a long time, so you can go around the clock for a full lap or even 2. Also, you can customize whether you want to hold down the shutter, take bursts, or record video. By touching the screen, we can adjust the exposure or focus. In fact, in this case, also at the top it offers a selector for exposure compensation. But if we want manual adjustments, we can access the master mode, which in this case, in addition to offering us manual adjustments, will have a different interpretation of the colors, which I will show you later. Since you notice that within the master mode you can have an automatic setting or a pro setting where the ISO is revealed, which can go up to 12,800 in the case of the main camera, and the shutter speed, which can be 30 seconds maximum. In addition, we could also modify the compensation, focus and white balance. In fact, the white balance is specifically determined in kelvins or also in a more specific shade of green and pink. So, it has a lot of parameters for your specific photo settings, and of course it also allows you to shoot in RAW and also in a RAW Max format with more information for you to develop your photos in a more professional way. Obviously, being a device focused on photography, we had to demand that from it, and it does deliver. In fact, something I really like about the master mode is that it has this option where you can specifically customize the color rendering that it does. So you can adjust the saturation, the contrast, the sharpness, and if you want to activate a kind of vignette, then all these parameters are going to be stored here in master mode so that whenever you want to use your own interpretation of colors, you access master mode and that's it. In the additional options, you could also activate a histogram if you are a connoisseur of photography. And for smart captures, note that in this case nothing happens if we want to scan a document in the main interface, but it does have a special mode called Text Scanner, where it will be able to detect the edges of these sheets. But note that the result will simply look like a cropped photograph and you cannot apply some filters to optimize the scan. Also, you can't add multiple pages to a PDF document as we've seen on other devices. And QR code scanning with the camera is disabled by default, but you can enable it in the settings. And note that curiously, this device brings a function to take an ID photo. That is, I will simply capture the image and the device through artificial intelligence will make the crop to leave the white background. This way you avoid having to go to a studio to take this kind of pictures, although it takes a little time to process and only allows us to use the main camera and not the telephoto camera. Note that the result is quite good for this type of identification photographs. It also allows us to modify the size of this photo depending on which one you specifically asked for. So it has several presets. Or it also has a completely custom setting, but it comes very good. In fact, you can also put some facial retouching to modify absolutely everything on the face as well with different parameters and different levels. And finally, it lets you modify the background in case you've also been asked for some specific solid lighting or certain gradients on the back. All 4 cameras that this device has are high resolution, so with all of them you can use this 50 megapixel mode. Although with the ultra-wide camera I get the feeling that it doesn't give us as detailed a picture as it should, but subsequently with the 23mm camera it goes up to a very good level of detail in these kinds of high resolution pictures, so you can do cropping. And the same thing will happen with the zoom cameras. In this case, the 65mm camera also makes very good use of the high-resolution sensor, giving us a very high level of detail in this type of mode. And the 135mm camera also gives us excellent photo quality. It's honestly one of the best I've seen in the industry, at least within the devices I've tested. I could definitely say that this is the best in this aspect. For moving pictures, if you have a lot of light, the ultra-wide camera and the main camera are not going to have any kind of suffering. In fact, the 72mm camera isn't going to show any signs of weakness either, but the 135mm camera might struggle in these types of scenarios as movements can get swept away. We made 2 attempts and again this complication was noted, but it should be noted that this device has an action mode. So using the action mode, you can see that with 135mm we have a very good and well-detailed result despite being a moving scene. It does this by using a much faster shutter speed, so we have a very good result. Outdoors the result is going to be very good, although the ultra-wide camera from my point of view is the one with the biggest weaknesses as it reveals much more chromatic aberration and a bit more distortions. So this camera could still improve in the next generation, but it's still a very good picture. The 23mm camera will also do very well in these outdoor scenarios, maintaining good color saturation, good lighting and of course good textures as well. The main camera is the only one that could manage to take pictures of around 25 megapixels if you enable an additional option in the settings, which I find curious because the rest of the cameras would also have this capability by integrating high-resolution sensors, but for some reason only the main camera has this feature that you can certainly get to enjoy a lot because the pictures look much more detailed. This would be the result with the default 12 megapixel photography, and I think there is no doubt that there is a noticeable difference. Hopefully through an update they will allow us to use 25 megapixels with the rest of the cameras, because that would be excellent news. For now the level of detail is very good, but for example the iPhone or the Huawei devices of the Pura 70 series also allow us to take pictures in 25 megapixels, but in this case you can only use the main one. But let's continue the analysis with the 72mm camera that also outdoors has a good performance, good detail and good colors. And it is very curious that in this case 2 specific zoom lenses have been integrated. In the case of photography with 135mm, we have once again an excellent result with good colors, good level of detail and all very good in this type of light conditions. But in order for you to see the capabilities that this zoom device has, we will try to get closer to this area that is very far away. This is the 23mm camera, which is considered to be the main camera by many people. Notice that the 47mm photograph is available, that is zoom 2x, which still maintains optical quality, and we definitely still see good detail. Subsequently, you see the 72mm photograph, now 135mm, and obviously we still have an excellent level of detail. Now you are looking at 225mm, and it is very curious that the photograph still has a very good level of detail that practically looks like optical quality. At zoom 30x, the result still looks good, although in this case you start to notice that it is a digital zoom. At about zoom 50x, I think it is already very obvious that it is digital zoom, and in this case it would not be very convenient to take these pictures. And the maximum zoom is 120x, which being the maximum limit, it is obvious that we will not enjoy the highest quality. But in a more usable range in everyday life, look at the result. In this case, we are already using the 135mm lens that is 6x zoom. So in this case we have excellent quality. See what it would look like at 10x zoom, it is still an exaggeratedly detailed result. And again at zoom 30x we start to notice that it's digital zoom, but it's still a pretty decent picture for a cell phone. And it's going to be rare that you get to this level of zoom in everyday life, but in this case we're talking about a zoom of about 50x's, and notice that the face still looks pretty sharp. And here again it's 120x's, which I insist will be uncommon for you to use, but there it is. Indoors it surprised me for the better. In this case the day was overcast, so it was much darker than it usually is when I test with these devices in this setting. And the result comes out very well with either camera. It retains good color intensity, very good contrast, good level of detail. The only thing to note here is that in scenes that are very dark, you notice that you're not going to use the 135mm lens. Actually, thanks to the aperture, we realized that you're using the 3x zoom lens, that is the 72mm lens, applying a crop on the sensor. So the photograph doesn't look as detailed in terms of zoom in these kinds of darker scenarios. But in other indoor scenarios as well, I found the result to be spectacular with all cameras, although again the ultra-wide camera is the one that I consider to have a little less quality due to color rendition. But after that, the pictures look great with any of the cameras. Even with the zoom setting 2 digital X's, it still has excellent quality. I was particularly surprised at how well it captures textures. With the 135mm lens, you start to notice that it loses a little more illumination, but in this case I did use this lens because I noticed the f4.3 aperture, although I did notice that it can suffer in scenarios that don't have as much illumination. But watch with zoom 20x's, the result is still super good in terms of capturing textures, so it's a camera you're going to really enjoy in various lighting environments. And for backlit scenes, notice that the preview does look optimized, balancing highlights and shadows well. And the results are really very good. Notice that the shadow area is perfectly well lit, capturing the result very well. The brighter areas are also well balanced without being overexposed or burned out. Evidently, the nature of the lens produces this completely natural out-of-focus effect in the background. And with the ultra-wide camera, we will also have a good result in terms of light and shadow balance, but again it's revealed to have more chromatic aberration than the rest of the cameras, so this lens specifically is the one that we hope they can improve in a next version. But almost all manufacturers have the ultra-wide lens a little bit simpler. However, note that with the 72mm camera we still appreciate a very good result. In fact, it is not a photograph that has the portrait mode. But due to the focal length and the characteristics of the sensor, it achieves this very nice effect in photography. It really is a photo of excellent quality, not only because of the very good balance of lights and shadows, but also because of the good detail it achieves. And look at the 135mm camera. It seems to have a little more trouble in the brighter areas. It does overexpose a little bit, but honestly I still find it to be an excellent quality photograph, especially for those who want to take very natural portrait photos. The result is completely optical, so you don't rely on software processing. In the evenings there won't be much difference if you use the automatic mode or the night mode. Really, the pictures have a good quality in terms of the handling of the brighter areas, also the handling of the noise in the darker areas and the color saturation. So with any of the cameras in these tests that I performed, I could confirm that we have a very good performance. Possibly the more you zoom in, the less light you're going to get, and that's why it can suffer a little bit more in darker situations, but I insist that there's not much difference between automatic mode and night mode. In the darker areas where there is no light source present, I think there will be a little bit more difference between auto mode and night mode, but mostly when you get to use the zoom cameras, because with the ultra-wide camera and the main camera there really isn't much difference. In fact, the zoom 3x zoom camera pretty much maintains the same performance again with night mode and auto mode, but when you get to the 3x setting with auto mode, it will actually use the same 5x lens. However, with night mode it will use the 6x lens, and the color seems to me to be much more accurate in this type of photography. From my point of view, in auto mode we have a little warmer rendering than I would like, and also more lighting than I would like. In fact, as you notice, the darker areas still look quite light, although it should be noted that it was a cloudy night, and with the moonlight it cast that light on the clouds. So in a way this result is understandable, but remember that this device includes a master mode. This master mode will allow you to have a much more realistic picture. Surely this mode will be loved by people who love pure photography, because this mode respects much more the shadows and more natural colors, although it also lets you move manual parameters. So in this case, I lowered the exposure a bit more to make the picture look more like real life in terms of the darkness that was represented at that moment. Watch in the daytime, this would be the difference. This is the automatic mode and this is the master mode. I think it's very noticeable in the colors as the master mode has a little bit more natural rendering and not as intense as the auto mode. So I insist, for pure photography lovers, you will surely enjoy this master mode. This is a last example that is very noticeable in the red color. This is the automatic mode, and then you see the master mode where we definitely see a much more natural and not so saturated red color. In fact, I used this device during a wedding to test it out and really loved the results. This is another photograph with the master mode where I insist that I really like how it respects the dark areas and shadow areas, and the blur generated in the foreground is completely natural since I did not use the portrait mode in this photograph. I insist, I find the master mode very good to have photographs that do not look so processed. For macro photography, the device automatically switches to ultra-wide camera but applies digital zoom. So the picture appears with 23mm specifications, but in reality it used the 14mm lens, and in this case I honestly think it could still improve. I think macro photography is one of the weakest points of this device, as it will be a bit complicated to achieve a uniform focus. Maybe integrating variable aperture could improve in the next generation. I think the ideal in this case is to use the 72mm lens that, despite not allowing such a close focus, anyway I think the result is much better than what the macro mode offers us. But we do have to clarify that this device does not offer us telemacro functions on the zoom lenses, unlike again the Huawei Pura 70 Ultra for example, or some other few exponents of the current market. So this is one of the few points where I think that still this device can improve the next generation. And in this case, if the ultra-wide camera range doesn't seem good enough for you, remember that you can use the panorama mode, and in this case it's curious that it allows us to use the panorama mode with the main camera giving us a high-resolution picture. Or you can also take a panorama picture with the ultra-wide camera and again with a good resolution. So yes, you could achieve photographs with a lot of space, they blend in nicely, although again with the ultra-wide camera it will reveal a lot more chromatic aberration in the close details, and in this case it also lets us take panoramic pictures with the zoom cameras, which I don't find that useful, but it is present. And a similar result you could achieve with the expand mode, which is a kind of wide photography. In this case you don't have to do any kind of scrolling, it's just like cropping your picture. It's a mode inherited by Hasselblad that was available on their cameras, and they've moved it to the OPPO devices they have collaboration with. And another section where this device has left me very surprised is in portrait photography. Notice that from the 23mm setting we have a good result, focusing very well on the foreground, also detecting in a good way the objects in this foreground to apply a very nice and precise bokeh effect on the background. But if you use the telephoto lenses or settings, we will have an excellent result. Notice that in this case it is a 47mm setting. The aperture specifically in this portrait photography section is a simulated aperture, so in this case we're not talking about physical aperture. But definitely that the result also looks very nice. Notice how well it detects the foreground, it blurs the background very well. Here it missed a little bit in this area, but it was too complicated. And notice also it allows us to take portraits at the 65mm setting. Again, the result looks very good. Portrait photography is spectacular with this device. And at 135mm, no other device has allowed us to take portrait pictures to date. So we could say that this is the first one that allows portrait photography in this style. And it's of very high quality, the level of detail is tremendous, the blur is also very nice, it detects the foreground well. Even in the hair area, which is always usually very tricky for mobile devices, we found good quality. So I really enjoyed this device a lot, taking portrait pictures. It's an expert and we could say it's inside the top 3. In fact, here are some other portrait pictures that I took just so you can see what you could achieve. And the result, I insist, that I really liked. For video recording, we will find a very good news because it supports 4K at 60 frames per second for all cameras. Effectively, whatever lens you use on the back and even the front camera has these same recording capabilities. So that's excellent news, and while we're recording, notice that we can also switch between all of these cameras without any kind of problem or complication. We have these quick shortcuts, or we can also have this ring to quickly switch between all these zoom settings. It also has a button to take pictures while recording and also to pause, plus a button to turn on the flashlight. The only thing missing would be the ability to rotate to the front camera without having stopped the video recording, which is not available at any time. And for recording, we can also select some different color filters. Among them are still present Hasselblad Master filters, or we also have other normal filters. We also have the facial beauty button, but in this case with a single slider. And finally, a button to record with blur mode. Note that the device also has a movie mode available, which is going to record in a 21:9 format. That is, a wide format like the one usually used in cinema. And there are also manual controls like what we saw in photography but now applied to video, although it doesn't seem to have a log mode for later colorizing the video in post-production or something similar. For video recording, we are going to find regular behavior in the ultra-wide camera, just like in photography. A bit of chromatic aberration is revealed. You're even going to notice that it doesn't handle noise as well, but the main camera records with much better quality. There is no doubt that in this case it would be much more convenient to record with this camera and also with the zoom cameras. In both photo and video, I find that the ultra-wide camera falls very short, but the other cameras perform very well. Note that even with a little zoom, 2x, it still looks good, although the optical quality that we saw in the image is no longer visible. Obviously, by switching to 3x or 6x, we are going to have optical quality again because of the optical zoom they have. So we also find a good range. The maximum zoom is 18x when recording video. So I think there is still a good range of improvement here, although in the photographic section we see very spectacular things. In video it is fine, but it still looks like there is much more to improve, taking into account what they have achieved in photography. But overall, the video is very good compared to all smartphones in the segment. However, there is something curious, and that is that when the device is hot, the stabilization is disabled. Watch this video. We are not even supposed to be in a scene of too much movement, and the result looks really very bad. And we notice again the same thing I was telling you, the ultra-wide camera has a lot of chromatic aberration. And the rest of the cameras behave well, but it is very curious that the stabilization is disabled when the device is quite hot, so you have to be careful about that. Indoors, much more noise appears with the ultra-wide camera, confirming what I have been telling you. It is of a lower level than the other cameras. Obviously, switching to the main camera corrects this problem, so it is not recommended to record with the ultra-wide camera in this kind of scenarios. And as I mentioned, zooming does not preserve optical quality at intermediate zoom, but rather optical quality is preserved in the form of a 1, 3, and 6x formula. Although in 6x also appears a little more noise due to the small aperture that it can have. So the acceptable range still for recording video from my point of view indoors would be 1 to 5.9x. Because you notice how you can immediately distinguish the change in lighting as you're moving between the different cameras, and it definitely confirms that this could be improved. On the stage where I always shoot the interior shot, there was a little less lighting because it was an overcast day, so I didn't want to record just that test, but even within this test it pretty much confirms the same behavior that I had mentioned to you in the previous scene. In backlit scenes the result will be quite good. It seems to me that it balances light and shadow perfectly well. You don't even notice aggressive jumps in the lighting when it detects or fails to detect the face. Although with the ultra-wide camera you see a bit more chromatic aberration. But switching to the main camera you notice that it still retains a good balance of highlights and shadows. The result is actually very good in this type of scenario. Even applying zoom 3x we still appreciate the same result, and I love the blur that is naturally generated in the background, giving a much more professional camera effect definitely. And even with 6x it also performs well in backlight. We see no problems. So in this sense the recording quality really is quite remarkable. In addition, the device integrates HDR recording, although it could be played only with compatible devices, with the aim that the illuminated areas also emit more brightness on the screen on which you are playing it. Although I like the result better without HDR in automatic mode, but it is remarkable that it has these capabilities. At night we again point out that the ultra-wide camera should improve. There is a lot of noise present and it does not have too much light input even in the darkest areas. Note that for the sake of eliminating noise there is a bit of a sharp change, but it still doesn't seem to give us a very attractive result. The main camera behaves much better in this type of low light conditions, although the light balance can be a little imprecise, but it is normal in this type of very warm scenarios. However, it handles noise with much better quality and even balances the brighter areas better as well, so it is highly recommended to shoot with this camera. If we switch to the zoom setting, we still have a good quality, although you must focus on well-lit areas to effectively make the change, because in very dark areas it is likely not to make the change of lens, but bet 100% by digital zoom, as it notes that in the darkest areas, if you have optical zoom, the noise will be considerably high and will have very little definition. So this would be another area for improvement, since zoom cameras do not have as many capabilities when recording video in low light conditions. The stabilization is good as long as the device is not hot, because as I told you, here the device was very hot and look at the result, it is quite disastrous. But it also has a super stable mode, although it uses the full HD resolution to one of the larger ones, but it could be useful in this kind of conditions of lots and lots of action. And interestingly, this one did work even though the device was hot or perhaps had already cooled down a bit. The super steady mode can also be used with the main camera and not only with the ultra wide one, which is remarkable, although with the main camera you could notice the compensation movements much more, obviously because you don't have such a wide panorama. And in the case of the zoom cameras, note that they also have a good level of stabilization, so you could go walking while you are recording, and I think the result is good enough, although not the best in the category. Interestingly, it also integrates a portrait recording mode. In this case, it does so in Full HD resolution 2 of some of the largest. And if you do it with the 1x lens, the result can look good if there is not much movement, but note that at the edges of the person is very noticeable artificial blur generated, so this definitely still has a very good range of improvement. Also, the intensity of the blur does not change depending on the distance, and although it maintains good stabilization, another disadvantage is that it cannot keep objects in focus, so there is a lot of room for improvement in this aspect. In fact, it allows us to use some zoom when recording with this effect, but it does not use any of the optical lenses, so it is only digital zoom. Therefore, even though it lets us use a zoom to get a telephoto perspective, the video looks much blurrier than we would like. The device also has a fast camera mode that is stabilized, although curiously the fast camera only records in Full HD and not in 4K, so here again there is another section where it could improve. In addition, the speed can go from 10x, which can be more or less useful for recording movements of people, and can go up to 960x, with which you could record with higher quality landscapes or movements in the sky and even plant growth. But the fact that it can't be in 4K is a big disadvantage. And with respect to the slow motion, the curious thing is that it allows us to use both the ultra-wide camera and the main camera and the 3x zoom. With all of them, we can record in 240 or up to 480 frames per second. So first you were seeing the result at 240 frames per second with the ultra-wide camera. Now, 480 frames per second with the ultra-wide camera, which would be super slow motion. Although in this case, it applies a crop on the sensor, so you don't see as wide a scene, but you also get the chromatic aberration that we've seen throughout the whole review in this ultra-wide camera. So the slowness is going to be the same with any of the three lenses. The result is good in this regard. And what I like is that even recording at 480 frames per second, it can be an extended recording and not just a fraction of a second as some other devices would offer in a slow motion mode. I would love for it to have 4K at 120 frames per second for being a high-end device, and it should be noted that with the 3x setting you see a bit of sweeping motion. So, I wouldn't say it's the most spectacular slow motion I've seen, but it could deliver with good quality. Hopefully with some update they will enable 4K at 120 frames per second because the processor does have the capabilities and I'm sure the sensors do as well. Regarding the focus, remember that the ultra-wide camera does have these capabilities, so it reacts in a good way. You could even record a kind of macro video thanks to the close focusing that this camera can allow you to do. With the main camera, there is also a focus that has good response, it doesn't seem to get confused or something similar. And even the zoom cameras also respond very well to fast movements with this focus, and also on subtle movements they are able to go about adjusting the focus nicely. So honestly, in this aspect I don't find any complaints with this device as they really offer very good quality. And with the 6x lens you could also achieve a kind of macro capture. Even though it doesn't have such close focusing capabilities, I think the result is attractive for this kind of scenario. Video with the front camera can be in 4K, which is a good thing, but again it seems that the front camera is several notches below the rear camera. Colors look a bit paler, you don't see as much contrast, though fortunately it retains good stabilization, and in backlit scenarios it tries to balance lights and shadows well, although the highlight areas look slightly overexposed, but unlike most devices of lower ranges, in this case we do see a better treatment. Interestingly, it allows us to zoom in on these types of scenarios, and if you combine it with autofocus, you could obviously show some products in more detail to your audience. Remember though, you can't get too close. If you get too close, it won't be able to focus. And the white balance can get altered a bit abruptly, so it could still improve in several ways with an upgrade. And above all, the next generation integrates in a higher quality lens. Note how indoors it reveals a greater amount of noise, confirming to us that this camera is simpler than we would have liked. Definitely that at this price point and being a device that has very powerful cameras on the back, we would expect a better implementation for the front camera, but it's not really going to give us that desired quality. There will appear much more noise present and the colors are not as accurate. And at night this is confirmed. You're definitely going to notice more noise, even the focusing started to have some complications, so definitely that the front camera has disappointed quite a bit considering the quality that we had seen in the rear system. Consider that if you are in an exaggeratedly dark scene, the device will indeed be able to illuminate its screen to try to give you more light on the face, but it is still insufficient. Interestingly, this camera also integrates a super stable mode, which is something uncommon in devices with the front camera, although it is not as advanced and drops the resolution to Full HD, and I consider that there is not so much difference with respect to the automatic mode. It also has the fast camera mode available on the front camera, although it goes in Full HD, so it is not that high quality. Also, it doesn't integrate front slow motion, but it does integrate a dual recording mode, so you could show both the rear camera and the front camera, although note that it doesn't have stabilization, and although it does allow you to zoom in a bit, it doesn't really do the switching between the different lenses like it does in normal mode, but it does serve to show both sides of the scene, and remember that in this case it records in Full HD. Fortunately, the focus does remain enabled, which gives you a very good experience. And the little box you can move along the screen, although it has a small stop on the right and you can't resize it. You can also record in a round format in this picture-in-picture mode, and it has exactly the same characteristics. I would like the scene to be a bit more stabilized considering we are talking about a high-end device. And to rotate the view, you have to stop the recording and start it again. So again, it's another one of those points that could and should be improved with some future update. Finally, it also has the split screen mode where again you can show both cameras. It has exactly the same functionality. So it has what it needs, but for being high-end, we could demand more from it. And curiously, this front camera also integrates a portrait recording mode, so it blurs the background, and the truth is that the result is much better than what we had in the rear camera. The edge is not so noticeable, although if there is a little more aggressive movement, it does start to show, but it could go more unnoticed. Although again, it won't be able to keep objects in the foreground in focus, but at least it could give you an attractive result in certain scenarios. Although the result is recorded in Full HD and not in video quality. This device comes with Android 14 and ColorOS 14, so in software it does come with the latest from both OPPO and Google, although in this case I'm using a Chinese edition, so it has the Chinese software, which would also allow us to get a glimpse of the potential of what OPPO can offer, which hopefully in future updates will become available globally as well. Since in this case it supports 4 years of software updates and 5 years of security patches, which is not the top of the industry, but it is good enough to maintain high performance. For starters, you are noticing something that I personally hate, and that is that the wallpaper is changing all the time with sometimes quite strange images of unknown artists, but remember that this can be turned on or off simply in this part. In fact, that's how little customization the lock screen has available. The truth is that in the lock screen we will not find things as advanced as if we would find in other more recent systems. But as for customization of the entire device, remember that there is also a section where we can modify all the wallpapers with different effects and filters. There is also the always on display feature, which is quite nice because you can customize some cover art, some icons, or you can even create your own image or your own emoji to place there. However, in this case it does not seem to have some additional animations as we have seen present on other devices. We can quickly modify the colors of the whole system as well as the shapes that the quick settings icons have, whether you want completely round or rectangles with rounded corners or any other figure. It also includes the edge lighting function to illuminate the edges of the screen when receiving a notification or call. And curiously also appears a video ringtone function to show some clip while someone is calling you, but in this case it seems that it is not available because we are not in China. Something that I really liked about the home screen is that you can slide the bottom icons on a diagonal and see how all the other icons are going to join in this part that you can reach perfectly with one hand. So the moment you lift your finger, we're going to open that application directly. It's very handy and I haven't seen it on other devices. Obviously, we also have this sidebar from which we can open some additional tools, for example the file dock, where we can save some images, screenshots or text that we want to later use in some other application simply with a drag and drop gesture. Recent files will also appear, which can also be useful to attach a file or image. And we will also have shortcuts to applications that, by the way, will run in a floating window mode. Although you can only open one application at a time in this format, then it falls a little short, especially compared to the multitasking experience that we could get to find on other devices. It is not such a useful tool, although it will allow us to resize this small window size or move it to the space we want. Obviously, we can fully customize the shortcuts that appear in this sidebar, but note how YouTube does not support this mode, and in this sidebar will also appear many shortcuts of OPPO's artificial intelligence that I'll show you in a moment, but among other shortcuts is also the option of screenshots in both image and video and some other quick tools. Another curious fact is that this device includes a tool to open quite complex documents such as Photoshop documents, CAD documents, also Illustrator documents and many others. So it can be very useful to take a look at documents you are working on your computer. But let's focus on OPPO's artificial intelligence, which is called Brino, although I tell you this is a glimpse of what OPPO is preparing later, because for now most of these functions are exclusive to China. For starters, this is their own voice assistant, although globally they support Google Assistant. But hopefully they will soon launch their own voice system globally as well. The artificial intelligence model developed by OPPO is called Andy's GPT, and in this case it also includes several functions. In fact, Brino has its own app that you can open to explore more functions. Here it can explain all the shortcuts you can use through quick voice commands. But as everything comes in Chinese, I will take the opportunity to show you a feature called Screen Translator that will allow us to translate all the content of the screen even while we are interacting with it, something that is very useful. In this case, I said to translate from Spanish to Chinese and all the text I can understand well. In fact, if I enter any option, watch how it immediately returns to do the translation. So I can perfectly go exploring all the artificial intelligence capabilities that OPPO has, which in this case includes creating PowerPoint presentations, creating images, retouching text to change the wording, and many other artificial intelligence tools that we already see today in other tools, but in this case fully integrated into OPPO's system. So I expect all these tools to be available globally soon. In fact, it also integrates a feature called Photo Studio, which will be able to generate images of you simply by giving it as input several pictures of you. So you can choose the style of photo you want, and then you simply upload some photos of yourself so that it learns what your face looks like, and then it will automatically generate the photo for you. Although it takes about 30 minutes or so, since in this case I put it to work with a photo of me and I'm waiting for it to finish. This device also includes a feature called O Family that allows you to manage your entire family, although obviously everyone must have OPPO devices, but see how you could track the location of your children or interact with each other as well. This device also has an option to summarize your calls and process all kinds of audios to text. It also includes several gestures, traditional ones like taking screenshots and the like, but also air gestures. Although it does not serve to navigate the screen by scrolling, but only to answer calls. So in this sense, the experience is still limited. But it also includes a facial retouching in video calling applications, although it is only compatible with some Chinese applications. But note that also thanks to generative AI, it includes an image eraser where you simply have to enclose the person or any object you want to delete, and note how the deletion will be through generative AI. So it doesn't just fill in the patterns around it, but it completely imagines what would be behind this object or person, and the result is definitely very good. And another thing that I would love OPPO to bring available globally are the Braino shortcuts. In this case, it brings a specific application where you can get to explain all these shortcuts that has generated, but everything is in Chinese, so I cannot explain in much more detail. Hopefully OPPO brings this level of automation globally, because it is something that from my point of view is sorely lacking. Overall, ColorOS is one of the most evolving operating systems lately. This is also demonstrated by the Optics engine, which in this case you can customize as Optics. Here it allows you to edit the intensity of that bounce that it generates in the form of vibration, and many areas of the system are going to generate this type of response. So the feeling is extremely premium when you're using the device. For example, in this carousel of recent apps, you also feel this little vibration on every change generated from the list. But there are many more areas of the system that have this utilization, so the experience is very good. This device includes fingerprint reader inside the screen with up to 5 records, although we are in front of an optical reader and not ultrasonic. Obviously, it allows you to change the animation of this unlocking, and also has shortcuts to access very quickly to some function without releasing your finger when unlocking. It will also have facial recognition, but it is simple in 2 dimensions. It also includes the smart lock feature to keep it unlocked in trusted places or also while connected to trusted devices. In addition, it also includes a completely proprietary password manager that, in conjunction with OPPO's own cloud called Hey Cloud, can make you fill in your passwords quickly, although this is only available in China because globally it depends on Google. And it also has other tools like app locking, app hiding, a secure safe, system cloner, and gives you alerts if someone is accessing your clipboard. It also includes a child mode where you can authorize only certain applications that the child will be able to run. You can also assign some session time limit and some other tools to improve their experience, such as visual protection and similar things. Obviously, to exit this mode, you will have to authorize through your fingerprint. In this case, OPPO does not offer any private VPN for this device, but you can install one separately. And inside the phone manager, you can do a scan also against any kind of malware. This is in collaboration with a company called Smart Shield. In this case, I like that this Chinese edition is not so dependent on Google. So for example, you would also have an option to find your phone through HeyTap Cloud, which I hope soon OPPO will implement globally as well. And you also have the digital wellness options and other things. And here we're also going to note that Google doesn't force OPPO in China to customize things like pure Android. If you go into this section on any other OPPO device globally, you're going to see that it has a very different aesthetic. But here you can see how long you're using your phone, set some limits and more. It has a 5000 mAh battery, although in my tests it didn't perform as well as devices with that figure normally do. On average, only 3 hours and 24 minutes running the drainer in the foreground, which really isn't much. It performed as if it had 4000 milliamps. So it seems that in terms of extreme use of the device, the battery could drain very quickly, but I insist that's with extreme use demanding the maximum from the processor. But doing my test of running the drainer in the background while watching videos in the foreground, it got up to almost 6 hours. So I think it improves quite a bit. I think it does a very good job of managing the applications running in the background. Also, you can select if you want some applications to continue to run completely in the background, but the native management of the system is very good. In addition, it does have a normal power saving mode and also a super saving mode that you could use in an emergency, although it will restrict many things. But another very strong point will be the charger. In this case, it is SuperVox of 100 watts. In my test with 15 minutes, it recovered 53% of the energy, with 30 minutes 96%, and the full charge it finished in 32 minutes. So it's a very fast charge that works very well. But also, being a high-end device, in this case we will find wireless charging features and also reversible wireless charging, so it has considerably advanced features. In fact, I like that the wireless charging, you can customize it so you know if you want it to charge slower overnight. And speaking of which, the battery care is good enough. It gives you the battery health percentage and also allows you to enable smart charging for when you leave it charging overnight, but it doesn't have charge lock. For connectivity, let me mention that it does integrate support for 5G networks, and it is curious that in this case it does also include an application called O-Roaming that will allow you to buy packages when you go traveling, although this is aimed at China, but it would be great if OPPO offered this service globally. Although in this case it doesn't seem to offer me the eSIM option, but this O-Roaming feature would be through eSIM, so this may also vary depending on different regions. It also supports connecting to Wi-Fi 7 networks, although right now my internet is pretty slow, so it's not showing a very good speed, but usually it should connect fast. It also brings NFC for making mobile payments. Obviously that will vary depending on the regions. In this case, OPPO also in China has OPPO Wallet, which is super complete, hopefully globally also encouraged to launch such services to not rely so much on Google. It does not integrate FM radio, and it does have OTG, although you must turn it on separately. The screen projection can be in an intelligent way, as it can hide notifications, although it does not include a desktop mode for a more productive projection. This Chinese edition does not include Android Auto, but if it were to come out globally, obviously it would. And in the sensors, we do not find any major absence. There is everything necessary, also including a physical proximity sensor, unlike other devices that bet on virtual sensors. In the case of OPPO's ecosystem, the situation is very strange because in China they have a much more complete ecosystem, although globally it falls short. So let's sum it up that way. Hopefully soon OPPO will offer more of their products and services globally, because it really is a brand that is quite strong, but globally it still looks a little weak, depending in many cases on Google. In this case, they do get to offer you their own cloud called HeyTap with 5 GB for free. There you could back up photos, your voice recordings, and even your passwords and much more. And although they don't have an OPPO laptop, note that they do have multi-screen connect technology to connect to OPPO tablets, so your cell phone can be controlled from that device. But they also include the link to Windows feature already built into the system, so you can link it to your computer of any brand more easily. They also include a feature called Augwork that would allow you to manage your files from different devices, but it is not yet usable globally. And it also has OPPO Share to be able to send documents and photos even towards Xiaomi or Vivo devices. And in China they also have a smart home app where you can connect various types of devices, but globally they rely on Google Home. Let's talk about performance. In this case, it integrates the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 processor, as we would expect from a current high-end device. It is also accompanied by LPDDR5X RAM and offers us other virtual RAM, so at least in theory it should have a very high performance even with many open applications. And as you can see, in this case it practically took 2 seconds to open each of these applications. The truth is that the processor offers very good speed. And now we are going to try to be switching between several applications to test if there is any reboot, because in this case it has a lot of RAM, so it would be unacceptable to see any reboot with this amount of RAM. But it seems like the device has maintained remarkably high performance even switching between multiple applications, so I don't think it's going to have too many problems. Even browsing within applications is also expected to have a considerably high performance, so there is no problem at all in this regard. It also comes with UFS version storage, so it has a lot of read and write speed and a lot of capacity. But let's test how long it takes to export several linked clips, all recorded with this device using resolution of a total duration of 1 minute. And presto, it took only 20 seconds, showing excellent power. Now let's talk about gaming, and for that let me show you the game assist it has, although this also comes customized for China at the moment, but hopefully in the future we can see this same assistant globally. As you can see, it even shows us the latency that our Wi-Fi connection has at the moment, which is pretty bad. It also shows us the battery percentage and shows us direct access to all the games we have installed. Then when we open a game, we will also have this assistant in the sidebar, from which we can have a detailed analysis of the performance. We can switch between a power saving mode, a balanced mode, or the most powerful gaming mode. It also has Swift Touch to improve touch response. It also includes a button to optimize everything that has to do with the internet connection, a button to clear the memory, and another button to keep the game in RAM so you can open it faster next time. You also have tools to quickly open applications in a floating window mode. You can simply choose which applications you want to open in this style, and without leaving your game you can run each of them. You also have control over brightness, you can take screenshots in image or video, you can modify the audio style, activate a championship mode to avoid all kinds of distractions or interruptions, lock rotation, and even note that there is a gamepad button. Although it's going to work specifically when you have a gamepad connected to Bluetooth, I thought it would allow us to remap buttons, but it doesn't. In the case of Call of Duty, the device defaults us to very high quality at maximum frames per second rate, but obviously we can also go up to maximum graphics quality, and at that setting we can absolutely use all the effects we want. On the contrary, if we give priority to an ultra rate of frames per second, the graphic quality drops to a medium level, and obviously several effects are disabled. And the test, I can tell you, resulted in excellent performance. Even when recording, the screen did not reduce its power, although it did increase a little its heating, but really the device gives you a very good experience, worthy of a high-end device when you are playing. Also, by selecting the ultra frames per second setting, we will see an excellent experience. The game looks very fluid. It stays very close to 90 frames per second on its average, although again the warm-up was a bit high compared to what we have seen on other devices, since in this game it usually does not go above or near 45 degrees, but in this case it exceeded 45, showing us that it is a device that is going to focus much more on the camera than on the games. In the case of the Legends game, we changed the default setting to a manual setting all the way up to ultra quality at 60 frames per second, and in this case it maintained an extremely stable experience. Something curious simply is that unlike other devices, this one did not try to exceed 60 frames per second as we have seen in other tests, but from the start it stayed at 60 and maintained very good stability. Although again the temperature rose, in this case it reached up to 46 degrees Celsius, confirming to us that this is a device that could be a bit uncomfortable if you like to play content at very high qualities. The SpongeBob game by default is in high resolution, but we bumped it up to epic with epic quality at 60 frames per second. And again, the experience was very good. In this case, there is nothing to complain about. Just tell you that when recording the screen is when the device can generate more heat, but without recording the screen can perform better. In fact, it is curious because the screen recording was done in HD only, a fairly low quality, and still gets quite hot, but also through the settings you could get to modify the quality of your screen recording. It allows you up to full HD, but if you are going to record gameplays, I think it would be best to record in low quality, but that quality would not be very good to have very detailed videos. By the way, it also lets you select if you want to record the system sound and also if you want to record the microphone sound. It also lets you adjust the frame rate per second, allowing you to go up to 60, although by default it is on a dynamic setting. And in fact, you could also activate the front camera while you are capturing your screen. And finally, on Henshin Impact, it defaults to medium quality, but we bumped it up to the highest quality, also selecting 60 frames per second. And again, we saw a very high performance, in fact a performance that would be worthy of a 100% gaming-focused device. And interestingly, in this case, the heating did not become as exaggerated as one would have expected after having seen previous runs. So in this case, it maintained excellent stability. It only had 2 low peaks that didn't even go below 40 frames per second, so it's pretty good in this case. But if you have to consider that the warm-up can get a little bit annoying. So that's about it for this device. There is no doubt that it is a worthy flagship. Its strongest point will undoubtedly be the camera in terms of photographs. It's going to be a very tough rival to beat in photographs. And the experience around the phone is quite balanced. Possibly its weakest point could be the battery optimization, but that could be corrected with updates. Also, the ultra-wide camera, we hope they can improve it for the next generation, and above all, in general, the video quality can be further upgraded. For now, this has been all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can tell us, and see you next time.